Hello, everybody. Welcome in. It always takes a minute or so for everyone to join in from the waiting room. So we're just going to hang out for about 1 minute while we wait for everyone to get joined. It's great to see so many of you here, wherever you are in the world. Welcome. It's good to see everyone filling in. We have a really large group today, which is super exciting. Glad you're all here and ready to get involved with our Nautobot Next series that we'll be going through here today. Wow, you all are really ticking in this morning. Well, morning for me. So amazing. Love seeing the population here out joining and participating with us as we move forward with our webinar series. Super exciting topic that we have going on today. We're going to be talking about mastering network data population. So again, we are just hanging out for about a minute while we wait for everyone to get joined in. For those of you that are just joining in now, we'll get started here just shortly. All right, great seeing everyone. Welcome to our webinar series. This is Nautobot Next, Mastering Network Data Population. How do you unlock the full potential of Nautobot? And we're going to go through learning some best practices to populate and manage your network data. Today, for presenters, we have myself, Tim Shryack, and with me is Patty Kelly, who will also be assisting and going through some of the demos as we get into those details. We're going to talk about how the various methods of population that we can use to get data into Nautobot. We're then going to move on to the device onboarding 4.0 application. A lot of great features that we've had added in there into the device onboarding application. So we'll look at that. We're going to also talk about the single source of truth application, a great way that you can integrate Nautobot with other tools and get data from them. And then we'll just overview some other methods that you might use, of course, Q&A, and then we'll conclude out the webinar for the day. A couple of housekeeping items. Please do use the Q&A box if you have questions for us. That's the best way to get us questions so that we can make sure that we share them with the group and get your question answered. And then, as always, please use the React feature. It's really helpful for us to know what you're lighting up on, what you're interested in, what you're enjoying, as well as it's fun for the community and lets us all kind of participate together. So please do use the React feature as we go throughout the webinar for things that you might enjoy or like. Let us know. Okay, so you've got Nautobot. Now what? It's a powerful tool, but it's only useful if it's put to a task. That is, we need to put some data into it. And so that's our step one, is to deploy Nautobot. Step two is to start populating data. And then step three would, of course, be to deploy automations if you were looking at that whole picture of how you might use the Nautobot ecosystem. So today, we're going to focus on that step two, that data population piece. That's where we're going to cover. And then later in the series, as we go through the Nautobot Next series, we'll go further into how you might deploy automations in your environment, making your management practices safer, more efficient, more cost-effective, for example. So what is data population? It's easy to assume that it just means device data, right? But there's a lot more to it than that. While we're tracking device data, it's certainly an important task that Nautobot's really good at. Nautobot is capable of tracking a wide array of relevant network data, such as locations and their associated floor plans, personnel contacts, manufacturer contacts, contract information, even cloud resources such as controllers and storage, and many, many more things, right? So Nautobot really has a very large capability of what it's able to track and fill. So we want to make sure that's clear, right? It isn't just about devices. It's about all the things that you manage in your environment that you use for your day-to-day network management activities that can be tracked, monitored, and consumed within Nautobot. So how do we get data into Nautobot? There's several ways, right, that we can do that. Today, we're going to primarily focus on the two easiest methods to get data into Nautobot. That's our device onboarding application and our single source of truth application. We're going to give you an overview of each of those, and then we'll go into a demo. And then we're also going to look at some of the other methods at a higher level to ensure you understand, how to determine the best approach for you. As you can see here, there are other examples such as, CSV import, maybe Ansible playbooks, Slurpit as a great tool as well, or even, just manually creating objects. And then finally, Nautobot jobs. But again, our recommended approach, if you're just getting started with Nautobot, is to use the Device Onboarding 4.0 app or the Single Source of Truth app. Maybe both. You might use them in combination. So the Device Onboarding 4.0 app, let's dive into that first and start taking a look at how that functions and how you might use it. So the Device Onboarding app, right? It starts off with the IP address of the devices that we are interested in looking at or that we want to discover. There are two device onboarding jobs that will collect device attributes, and then we use them to populate Nautobot's CMDB. This solution is best used intermittently when devices on your network are known that they haven't been populated into Nautobot yet. So as we look at this process here, right, first thing we're going to do is to input those IPs into the app, and we're going to have those two separate jobs. One job is going to get the device information, that is just that the device exists. And then the second job is going to actually go pull data from that device. So for example, we need to go discover all of the VLANs, all of the interfaces, all of the VRFs that are just configured on this device, right? That's what happens in that second job. So you can think of that first job as something that you do to discover existing devices or new devices. Usually that's a less frequent task. But the go discover things that may be on the device itself, configuration things, those might be more frequent, depending on use case in your environment. So we're going to go collect those device information from our devices, and then we're going to put that into Nautobot, right? So that's the basic concept right here. The ability to provide some basic inputs. So the IP addresses that I want to go discover, the credentials that I need to use in order to get into those devices or attempt to get into those devices. The tool is then going to find that they exist. It's going to basically discover its management IP, what type of device it is. Let's say it's a Cisco iOS device. And then from there, that second job is going to go discover all of the details, right? And we'll be able to bring that into Nautobot. So again, the idea of the two jobs, one result, right? How do we quickly populate device data? And there, as we look at these two concepts here, right, like we're going to go a little further into what we're looking at here. So first job, right, the initial device population, out of the box support for Cisco iOS, XE, XOS, Arista EOS, and Juniper, right, are standard out of the box supported tools, devices. And these are the things that we can collect from the device during that process. So its name, its device type, its serial number, management IP, the platform, manufacturer, et cetera, right? This allows us to then get that list. And now we're moving on to actually going and collecting information from those devices, right? So here we're saying, hey, can I get all of the details? So the device interfaces, as I mentioned earlier, the VLANs, the VRFs, those extra pieces of information. Now, one thing to note here, right? This particular aspect of the tool, and similar across the platform in general, is you're saying, hey, you know what? There's this one thing I would really love to collect that you don't have already here. No problem. It's very easy to extend the collection mechanism in order to be able to get additional information that isn't supported here. Let's say, straight out of the box, right? So very easy to do. And also key, it's item potent. You can run this over and over again. You're going to get the same result, no problem. There's no harm in running it multiple times, right? Like it's not something where like, hey, you can only do this once, don't do this again after you've done it the first time. This functionality is available via the Nautobot Jobs menu, as well as the Single Source of Truth dashboard. Those are the two ways that you might get at these particular jobs and be able to run them off. So now we're going to pivot over to actually some real hands-on experience with the device onboarding application here. We're going to go into this demo, and Patty is going to take over for this part and take you through that.
Great, thanks, Tim. Okay, so let's take a look at device onboarding in action. Let me go over to my Nautobot here. So here's the main page for Nautobot for those that are not familiar with it. So what we want to look at is how we're going to populate Nautobot. And the use case here really is that maybe you don't have a source of truth and you're starting off, and the first thing that you want to do really is populate your source of truth from your existing network, because at that moment in time, the existing network is probably your source of truth already, as in you trust the configs that are on the device. Okay, so what we will do is we will go to use the device onboarding app. Okay, so device onboarding app, as Tim explained, has two separate jobs that we would use to basically figure out where the device is on the network, and then add that into a specific location so that it can be correctly stored within the source of truth. So when we go to our jobs page here, we go into our device onboarding and we look for device onboarding here, and we're going to sync devices from the network. So we're going to select this option. Now, our first option here, which we're going to turn off, is dry run. This is actually a best practice that we would normally run a dry run before we do any sort of a sync, but we're going to explain that a little bit later as part of a different demo. Okay, so for this, we're going to turn off dry run. So that means we're actually going to make changes into the Nautobot database. So once we turn off that, then we're going to select a location. We're going to select a location for this particular device that we're going to learn, and we're going to put it into Jersey City. Actually, before we do that, we can actually just check that there's nothing there, just to make sure I have a save view here for our Jersey City routers. Okay, so we see here that we have a Jersey City 02. Let's try and import Jersey City 01. So let me go back to my jobs and go back to my device onboarding. So here we go. And now we are going to go to Jersey. That's the location that I want to import this device into this location, into this site. Okay, we're going to select a namespace here. This is essentially just a logical segmentation that you can use to have overlapping IP addresses if you want. So we're just going to select the global here for this one. Then we are going to give it an IP address. So it expects to take an IP address so that it can basically connect out using SSH to ensure that you can log into the device. So we're going to use our IP address here, our default port for SSH. And then for our roles, we're just going to select our role, which is router. We're going to give the status. We just need to give some status for any of the device or the interface or the IP address. So we're going to put these all to active. And then our secrets group, we use our secrets group to define what the credentials are to actually log into the device. So this is predefined for us. So we have a username and password that are stored in this particular secrets group. For the platform, we are going to select, this is a Cisco iOS device, so we're going to select Cisco iOS. We don't have to select the platform, but in this case, we know it, so it actually makes it a little bit quicker. If we didn't, it would actually just use the auto recognition, which is under the hood with using NetMiko. So we have our Cisco iOS there to click run job. So that is going to go out to the network using that IP address. We can see our status here will tell us how the job is going. Right now it's completed. When we look at the logs, we can see here the commands that have been run. We see show version, show interfaces, and then there's a couple of sort of lower level details down here. So let's go back and see if we have our device now. If we go back to our view on our Jersey City routers. Super. Okay. So we have another device here. Okay. So let's check in here. This is our Jersey City router. What I get from this, as you can see, is I get the type of the device. I get my serial number. I also get the platform, which I had specified, and it'll also give me the manufacturer. And some of these things will, if they are not already there, it'll create them. And then it's also going to give me the management IP address. I see up here that I have one interface, which is essentially my management IP address, the loopback interface. Okay, so that was the first job, and that just gives us the basic device. It also assigns it to a site, which is really important. So now I know where it is. Okay, so what I want to do now is see if I can get some extra data. Okay, so I will go back to my jobs, go back to device onboarding, and we'll take a look at the second job that Tim outlined, which is to sync network data from the network. Okay. Again, we'll disconnect or sort of deselect the dry run. And now what I want to do is select my global. Again, we give our interface and a prefix. And now we already had our device name. So we'll search for that, Jersey City. 01. Okay, now I don't need to fill in the rest of the details because I know the device name is unique, so I should be good now. So all I got to do is click run. So it'll go out, connect to that device, and now, as you can see here, it's running another set of commands. So you can see it's running show versions, show interfaces switch port, and show ether channel summary for some of the lag information. Okay, so that's going to give us a lot more data, and hopefully when I go back, I should see more data for my device. Okay, so that's back to my devices in my Jersey City. Click on the device. Great. Okay, so I have now more interfaces. So here we will see that we have interfaces 1 to 5. It gives me the description, MTU values, and also the status of the interface. So this basically means now that I have a device, it's associated with a site, and I have all the information that I require now to start planning around how I can automate with this device. Okay, that's it. Back to you, Tim.
Thanks, Patty, for that great demo there. And we do have a lot of questions coming in. Don't worry, we will get them answered as we come towards the end of the sessions. But so please do feel free to keep putting them in as you think of them. It's great for us to be able to know where you're at and what you're thinking as we go through the demo here and webinar today. And thanks for all the reactions. Those are really fun. Love seeing them. So let's move on to the single source of truth application. Importing data from sources that you already trust. So the Nautobot single source of truth app, right? It features 14 out-of-the-box integrations that allows you to bring in data from other sources of record into Nautobot. It gives you a centralized repository of all that information. So basically, users and automation tools no longer need to access those multiple systems, right? They can just go to a single place and get all the data they need. Nautobot can then leverage that single source of truth app to populate its data models, which goes beyond devices to include many types of data, like the contact and circuit information, like we talked about earlier, right? So we do cover a lot of devices out of the box, such as Infobox, Device 42, ACI, iTential, Meraki. You can see a summarized list here. Not everything is included here that we do actually out of the box able to integrate from. And due to its extensible nature, this app is really very adaptable. So it's very easy to add on custom integrations. Maybe you have some unique in-house tool or some other tool that we're not currently supporting out of the box. It's quite simple to add that in, that basically you're adding in that additional API that you want to extract data from and bring into Nautobot. As we streamline this creation and maintenance of automation, one of the key things that we really want to focus on that makes the Nautobot platform unique is not only the ability to bring this data in with the single source of truth application. So maybe I'm bringing in some IPAM data, I'm bringing in some CMDB data, I'm bringing in some software versions from these different applications or different tools that I'm running in my environment. What usually happens in the real world is that we enter data in one tool with one standard. And then inevitably in another tool, it's a slightly different standard. And so we have, let's say our naming convention isn't standardized across the organization, or just over time, people entered things in different formats. We can leverage the data validation and data integrity capabilities of the Nautobot platform when we ingest that data into Nautobot. So we aren't just blindly taking that data from those external sources and plunking it into the Nautobot database. We can run it through the data validation and integrity engines that Nautobot has to standardize and make sure that data is clean before we bring it in. And this is such an important step. Particularly when we're synchronizing data from multiple sources. We do not want to be making different names for things. For example, it might be the same device, but because it's entered slightly different, if we weren't running it through data validation and data integrity, we would end up with two devices created in Nautobot as an example, rather than a single one. So we want to make sure that we leverage that capability so that we actually are able to make sure we have good data that we're working from for both our users, as well as the tools that are potentially accessing data within Nautobot to then drive automation, for example. This is a great way to actually get a handle on the data problem in your environment, which probably you have. So combining that with the device onboarding, I can go discover things that exist out there in the real world. Then I can also pull things in from my existing sources of truth And in both cases, I can run that data through data validation and data integrity and make sure everything is as it should be before I bring it into the database. So this is really helping us have a good, clean data ecosystem within our environment. Absolutely very, very critical when we think about how we're going to drive automation, particularly if you think to the future. It's one thing if, as a human, I look at a screen and I see, something that is inconsistent. It's a whole nother thing when we have an automation that's about to go do a task and it finds inconsistencies, right? Either that automation is going to fail, or it might do something incorrect. And so we want to make sure that we have good, clean data when we get started. So very important step as we think about how we use the single source of truth app to bring data into Nautobot and leverage the platform to make sure that we're able to drive both our user community and our automations in an expected behavior and method. Okay, that brings us to now the next demo that we have here in our webinar today. That's going to be the single source of truth demo. And again, Patty's going to take us through that.
Great, thanks, Tim, again. So let me just jump out of that. Okay, and let me get back to my main screen. So for the single source of truth app that Tim is talking about and has gone through, the thing that we would use this generally for is if you have another system that is a system of record or an authoritative source for a certain data type. And one of the examples that we'll use here for this particular demo will be info blocks for IP data, for IPAM data, okay? So generally, before you have a source of truth, most organizations would probably have an IPAM system or some way of managing their IP addresses. So if that process is in place, it's easier to manage the IP data within the IPAM, and then you want to sync that back into your source of truth. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have everything within the source of truth. You may already have underlying processes that have already been well established. So you want to sync that data in to make sure that the source of truth has a consistent view and that you trust your data, that if you're using your source of truth to automate onto the network, that it's having the most recent data. So to do that within the Nautobot ecosystem, as Tim mentioned, we have a SSOT app. And what we'll do is we'll go and sync in this demo from the info blocks that we have in our environment. So we go down to apps down here. We'll look at the installed apps that we have here. We look at our single source of truth. In our instance, if we look at the config, we have an info blocks config list. Now, this means that we can actually have multiple instances of info blocks, which you've seen in a lot of different customers. You might have a dev instance, you might want to sync against a production instance, and they could have different URLs and you could have different settings based on what you want to import or what you want to synchronize, okay? So we can do that pretty easily within the GUI, within the config section on the actual application. So we see down here on the left-hand side, as I use the navigator, our single source of truth is the section down here. So we'll go to this dashboard view. And what we'll look for is our data sources. This is what we're going to look at is in this demo is the info blocks into Nautobot synchronization, okay? As you'll notice, actually, the device onboarding app is actually also using the underlying technology that we use for SSOT, and that is using a diffsync library that we have, an open source diffsync library. So let's take a look within the info blocks SSOT. We see on the right-hand side here the data mapping. So it basically gives us the data that we're going to be pulling in, syncing in from info blocks, what it is termed on the info block side. So a network view will be mapped in and synced into a namespace. A network on info blocks will be synced into a prefix on Nautobot, and an IP address into an IP address, VLAN into VLAN, and a VLAN view will be synced into a VLAN group on the Nautobot side. So let's take a look at synchronizing now. So if we set our job, as we mentioned before, when you're syncing in any data from any system, the best practice that we would use is to run through a dry run first. So the dry run basically would ensure that you can pull the data, in this instance, from info blocks, but not make any changes to Nautobot and saving any changes into the database. but it will give you a diff view of what would change. So you can basically validate if the changes that were going to happen as a result of the sync is what you want to see, okay? So in this instance, we're going to demonstrate the dry run feature. So we'll select dry run, keep that on. Again, we'll select our config. We only have one info-blocks config here. It represents our demo device. And then we click the run job now, and that's going to run in dry run mode, and we should see the status up here, which tells us that it's complete. Right now, it's just giving us some of the logging information in terms of what we pulled in from info-blocks, or what we would pull in. So it's loaded in a namespace, some prefixes, and some IP addresses. And then it gives us some of the details down here on the actual diff, okay? So it would have created 55 objects. So we can actually go up to the sync details section here. And in here, it'll give us, if you're familiar with looking at a diff view, it'll give us a nice visual representation of what would have been added. So here is where you would basically run this, and sort of like a pre-check before you actually make the synchronization, is to say, okay, well, what am I expecting to see? In this instance, we see that there would be 2 prefixes added, and there would be a number of IP addresses, but you see quite easily the IP address and then what it would be and what the actual domain is and any of the additional attributes and what they would be set to. Okay, so that will show us. It'll also show us the type here, which is a dry run. So it shows us that it wasn't a full sync. As a result, when you see the statistics over here, nothing has changed. Okay, so that would, if that was actually a non-dry run, you would have seen 55 creates here. Okay, when I go into the sync log, nothing is actually synchronized because I've run it in dry run mode, so I don't see any database changes. But as an example, if we looked at some if we looked even at a history of one that had happened before, let's take a bigger one. We have some, okay. Down here, if I was to check some of the logs of the sync logs of ones that are actually completed, we would see for each record that was updated, we would see exactly what the record was and what the diff is, what's been added in. Okay, so you can see obviously a lot of information, but very good in terms of being able to validate that the changes that were made at a certain time and the expectation of what the system state is. Okay, so as we ran a dry run, we don't have time to run the full sync, but this is the data that you would have seen, that you will see once you make the changes. I'll just go back to this. So as a result of the sync, you see all of the IP addresses that will be added in with their namespace and the record type, and then obviously with the status, and then the additional prefixes as well. That will show you. Okay. Back over to you, Tim.
Thanks, Patty. All right, so we're going to move in now to the last section of the webinar here, where we're going to go through other methods of population, ways that you might bring data into Nautobot beyond those primary 2 methods that we just discussed. So first is our CSV import method. So yeah, I think many of you probably very familiar with comma separated value files. And usually we would get these as an export from another platform, such as maybe ServiceNow or Device42. And while it is absolutely a very quick way to bring data into Nautobot, it's not without risk. Oftentimes the data from these exports maybe needs to be massaged a little bit before we can incorporate it into Nautobot. But if done carefully and properly, it can be really helpful at facilitating that initial population of data into Nautobot. Some of the pros of this, hey, it's part of the native core functionality. All data models support it, and it's generally very easy to do to export from some other tool. Some of the cons, as we mentioned, right? Like, hey, you could bring faulty data in, accidentally, and it may require some manual sanitization of that data before you bring it into Nautobot. So something to keep in mind if you're using this method. We generally see folks using this as a one-time step, as an initial step. If for some reason you don't want to use the device onboarding app or the other single source of truth app, maybe you might go this route as that one-time initial data population step. Another method, right? Ansible playbook. Kind of an interesting thing to think about as far as like how might I bring data into Nautobot. Nautobot's Ansible collection does provide Ansible plugins that as a way to bring in like modules, inventory, lookup filters, etc., to interact with Nautobot. These plugins are designed to help you manage devices, IP addresses, and even more. This approach does require an external Ansible environment, and custom development is required to leverage those plugins. So, some of the pros of this method, right? You can leverage those pre-existing or public artifacts from Ansible to facilitate population, and it is item potent. Uh, the cons here, hey, it's not directly integrated into Nautobot. You do have to have an external environment to run Ansible, and it will definitely require some custom development and maintenance. Next method, Python scripts as a Nautobot job. Some of the pros we see here, it's a very broad vendor and platform support. It's extremely flexible and extensible. Of course, with all things, there's going to be some downsides. It will require custom development, and maintaining it over time is probably going to be a challenge. For those of you that aren't familiar, Nautobot jobs are scripts that are written in Python to give you the ability to execute custom logic from within the Nautobot platform itself. Jobs can be written to facilitate nearly every single Nautobot task that there is, whether it's populating new devices to fetching data from external sources. This custom script or code can be executed from the UI, from the REST API, or via Nautobot's CLI. You can even add like a UI button that can be added anywhere you want within the application to be able to quickly execute a Nautobot job. So you don't necessarily have to navigate to the Nautobot jobs page in order to run a Nautobot job. And additionally, job hooks can execute a job whenever an object is changed. So Nautobot jobs are a really powerful way to leverage the platform. And one of them is you could actually use it to onboard data into Nautobot. This would give you a lot of flexibility as basically anything you can do in Python, you could do in a Nautobot job. Another way would be using the Slurpit integration. Our friends over at Slurpit have written a very very good application that allows you to import and scan your environment and ingest that data into the Nautobot ecosystem. Uh, some of the pros here, right? It does perform this device discovery. It does leverage the NTC text FSM repos and templates in order to understand that unstructured or semi-structured data that we might be getting from various vendors, over 117 plus supported. But a con to the application, if there is one, it is a very good app. We are friends with Serpent, so no worries there. But one of the cons, if there is one, is that it does require a license to populate attributes of devices into the tool. One of the final methods here are manual object creation, right? Just go do it by hand. Is absolutely a possible way. Some of the pros here, right? It's very simple to do. You go into the UI, you open up a device, you add it in. It's pretty straightforward. It's quite intuitive. Some of the cons, of course, anything we're doing by hand, prone to human error. And of course, this is not going to scale. This is an extremely time-consuming process. It's good for one to a handful of devices. You're definitely not going to want to do this at scale. You definitely would want to using one of the other methods, preferably the device onboarding app, would be the best way when you're working at scale or working with larger numbers of devices. So some other methods here of which you might want to get data into Nautobot as we think about how do we actually leverage the platform, because the platform in and of itself is useless until we put data in it. And that's one of the keys here at Network to Code, right? Is that we want to have functional tools that actually provide value. And this is step number one in getting value out of Nautobot, is getting some data in there to start working with. So let's go ahead and move on to our Q&A section. There have been folks that have been hammering questions at us, so thank you very much. Appreciate it. We're going to go through, I believe we should be able to get through all of these. If you have a question that you've been thinking about and maybe hasn't popped up here yet, please do fire it into the Q&A box. We'd love to get your question answered. We'll start going through them here today. We've gotten a couple of questions about iOS XR support for the device onboarding app and whether or not that might be part of the out-of-the-box supported features. I do have good news for you. It is on the roadmap, and we expect it to be released within the next 3 to 4 months. So it is coming soon. So don't worry there. We are going to get you that. because we know that's a very popular operating system that's out there. Lots of folks are running XR devices, so absolutely want to add that in. So that is coming. So got that one there for you. Let's see, we've got a couple of other questions here as well. So let's see, this one, Patty here. Do you know, or let's talk about how you might use the device onboarding app to be able to bring in the version of operating system or version of code that the device is running?
Yeah, you can actually extend that, and it's something that we've done for other customers as well, which is there's the capability to extend device onboarding for a particular platform. You can do it within Python code, and you just there's a mapper that you can configure within device onboarding to be able to map to your new module that will allow you to take advantage of some of the data that you've discovered. Say, for instance, from the show version, and you can get the iOS version within that show version command, and then you can map that to either a field or a custom field or something like that, or even one of the existing Nautobot modules. So that's possible. I will also add on the XOR, the iOS XOR stuff, you can actually extend that yourself now as well. There is platform mappers that allow you to create new platforms and extend the capability that's there. All you've got to do really is add in your own command, and then you use James Path to be able to extract some of the data. There's a new YAML file that'll allow you to extend. So it's something that is well documented, and there is a process to follow before it actually gets released in the next couple of months if you need it before then.
Excellent. Thank you, Patty. Okay, next question. The device discovery job, so the two that we talked about there, the ability to go discover devices and then bring in the data from them, are they part of the out-of-the-box functionality, or do I have to custom create those?
No, you get them out of the box, yeah. So you get the initial one, which is to discover just the device itself and map it to a location. And then the second one about the network data, you get them once you install the application.
Okay, so now this one is specific to if I'm wanting to pull in data from the device, specifically about the location. Will it support the idea that I might have locations that have sublocations? So for example, a building might have 5 floors. Each floor has 4 closets. I'd love to be able to just run the data sync one time and specify this group belongs to, potentially belongs in this location, in the sublocation, essentially, rather than say having to run the device onboarding app 5 separate times. Is that something that we would be able to support in the near future?
It depends where you're getting the location from, I guess. If it's something that you're defining at the start, when you would need to define the location within Nautobot first to select it, or you could, if you had the location somewhere within the config, say if it was in the banner or something like that, you could actually extend it if you wanted to do it that way and sort of dynamically learn it. There's a bit more development required to do that, but any of those sort of use cases will be possible. Yeah.
Yep. And then the follow-up question to that, with the concept now that we have those two separate onboarding jobs, will they ever be combined into one? Now, I know there's been a lot of internal debate about this, so I'll let Patty explain some of the details around that thought process.
I guess the capability would be there. The jobs may end up staying, but we could potentially chain the jobs, as in once you run one job, it might kick off the second job, and maybe that's hidden from the user. Right now, the way that the plugin or the app has been developed is to take on the additional functionality that was previously in the network importer application. So the first stage was to move away from the network importer and build that capability into device onboarding. And the first stage of that was to basically give device onboarding the job that was basically running the network importer sync. So whether it is going to, whether it will sort of migrate into just one single job, we don't have an answer just yet, but I would suggest that it could be something that we'd look at in the future. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you think about this, right, there's really not a whole lot of difference between having it as two jobs or one job. You could always chain the jobs if you wanted. But it does give you some benefit. For example, it's pretty common in a lot of environments where, new devices don't get added to the network that regularly, but the devices themselves may change more frequently. So that's kind of those two separate steps, right? You might want to go out and discover if new devices have been added to the network, say once a month, but maybe you want to scan your devices to see if they've changed every day, right? So there's kind of that little nuance there, right? Like maybe that device, the initial population job, you just run it infrequently, and the discovery of configuration within a device, you run more frequently. So that gives you some flexibility there by having it as two separate jobs. Okay, let's see here. Another question. So after the device is discovered, if we light up a new port, what is the best practice to get that interface added to the database? A weekly rediscover job or some other method? So I'm going to give you a little bit of philosophy about how we approach network automation and network source of truth here at NTC. And then we'll kind of go from that sort of academic view of the world, sort of a reference architecture view of the world, to let's talk about the practical real world, right? So in an ideal scenario, we are changing Nautobot, that is the source of truth, before anything changes on the network. It is the place where we define what the network should look like. It is our intended state. And that's the purpose, the primary purpose of Nautobot. So in an ideal world, we shouldn't have to go rediscover that interface was turned on, because we already did that as part of turning the interface on. That was the first thing we did. We went and turned it on in Nautobot. And then from there, things started to happen. Now, we understand that that process, that paradigm shift as a network operations group or a network engineering team, is going to take some time. And so there are other methods by which you could discover things in the real world and bring them back into our source of truth, into our intended state. But always keeping in mind, that is not the ideal scenario in which we drive change into a network. The ideal scenario in which we drive change into a network is we change the source of truth first, and then we start to make changes on our network. But again, we understand the real world. That's not always practical. And sometimes we have to do things the other way around. Patty, if you have any follow-up comments on that, please do jump in. But you absolutely could run that network discovery on a regular basis to go discover new interfaces that have been turned up.
Yeah, and that's it. I mean, as you said, sometimes those processes aren't there to support the fact that now you're using a source of truth. And if you were going to, you want to make sure that people that are going to the source of truth, they trust the data. So you could run that sort of sync daily, because ultimately you want to have, you want to get buy-in for people to start using the source of truth, that they trust the data, that they're seeing accurate results from what when they're making change or when they're looking for things. So if you were doing that, but as Tim said, you would need to make sure that ideally you move away from the discovery component, and then you're defining in your intended state from the source of truth.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, next question. Did that configuration that we pulled in from the device, did it go into Golden Config? So great question about kind of how the Nautobot ecosystem and the apps interact with each other, and how does that all work?
So it didn't go into golden config, because ultimately there's no, I guess at this point, there's no guarantee that you have golden config. So you want to be able to say, yeah, I turn on device onboarding. I want to learn my device. It is a good option in terms of saying, okay, how do I make sure that the data that I've discovered is now used in the rest of the ecosystem? But to answer the question directly, it doesn't go into golden config.
Yeah, not automatically, but that data is absolutely available to the Golden Config app, and you could, as a second step, then begin to incorporate it into your Golden Config application for sure. But yeah, it's not going to automatically appear there, because that might not be the behavior you want, right? We don't want to assume things that you want in your environment. We want to make sure you have the capability to use the platform as you wish. Okay, let's see. Is it possible to easily extend the onboarding app to new or not yet supported systems? The short answer to that, the TLDR, yes. How complicated it is for each and every system, that may vary, but it is quite easy to extend. Yes, not a problem. We have sort of answered this in a few ways here before, so I won't spend too much time on it, but absolutely, yes, you can do that. Okay, we have multiple customers with multiple locations. Can we onboard devices at a remote location with app overlapping IP addresses? So that's the first question. There's a couple follow-ups here, so we'll get that first one, then we'll go into the second one. So first one there is, how can I handle overlapping IPs in different locations?
Yeah,
Can I?
the overlapping IP was is handled really with the namespaces. So if you remember when we did the demo, we had to select a particular namespace where I was saying that if you had two devices with the same IP, if they're in separate namespaces, it was considered as a separate import because of the segmentation that's happening within the namespaces. So that's the first part.
Yep. The next question was, what about, and I think it's related to the type of operations this individual works in, where they are wanting perhaps a proxy that is able to get into that environment and, like, say, send data back to Nautobot, basically a phone home remote control type device you might put on-prem at your customer location in this example. Another one would be maybe a distant location that doesn't have direct access back to where Nautobot is. We do get this question pretty regularly. It is something that we have on the roadmap. It is at the moment very unlikely it's ever going to be part of the open source project. It is probably always going to be part of our Nautobot Cloud or Nautobot services that you would get from NTC. So absolutely is the short answer. The longer answer there is it was probably not going to be part of our open source solution, this particular functionality. This would be something that we absolutely would love to help you with. We do have this capability, but it's going to be as part of an engagement with NTC, not something that you might see in the open source project at this time. Okay. Then the next question is about, I think the question is asking, how can I easily get Nautobot with the device onboarding app installed? Can I just do that via Docker? I think is what the question is getting at. Essentially, how can I get started with easily deploying Nautobot and the device onboarding app in a single Docker? Or can I?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, I mean, it's Docker is probably the easiest way to do it. That you can pull down the image, and it's basically going to be a configuration setting where you're going to enable a particular plugin or an app, and from there, you can ensure that you pull down the right image and get started. It's pretty easy. Yeah.
Yep. Mamadou, you asked a question that I don't understand. I have to screen in in schema, single source of truth. I don't know quite what you were getting at there. Please follow up in the Q&A with a little bit more details there if you'd like an answer on that one, because unfortunately I don't quite understand what you were asking for. I apologize. Next one is, can we expect Aruba network support? So our wireless infrastructure, and can we be able to bring that in? I don't know the answer off the top of my head for that one right now. Patty, I'm not sure if you know. If not, we will find out and get you an answer on that.
Yeah, other than the platform mapper where you could actually specify the new platform and map that to the schema around sort of the additional the attributes that we have already. If that was possible, and if you can run, I guess, CLI commands to be able to pull that data, and if it's coming back in a format that's structured, and you're going to be able to pull it out, then I think we should be able to support that. But if it's like any other network operating system, we should be able to extend and support that. If it's over the API, that's going to be different, and that would be a more specific extension that we'd need to build.
Yes, yep. Okay. Next question. Is there a way to customize existing models, and then how would I think the question, so basically, is there a way to customize existing models? So short answer is yes. You can add a custom field and a custom relationship directly within the UI of Nautobot to any table in the database. So you can very easily extend those tables beyond what they have out of the box. So absolutely no problem. And then I think your question then was getting at, like, hey, if I did that, is that going to cause me any problems when I do an upgrade or an update? And no, so long as you do it through the UI, you add those custom fields or custom relationships, you have a lot of flexibility there. And you can think of those, even though we use the word custom, you can think of them as extensions, right? Like you're just extending the model as well as those relationships in the database. So there's not going to be any impact if you do an upgrade, no problem at all. So the next one. If we want to have a customized command in the onboarding app, how could we do that? So basically, I want to be able to say do some modification to the data as part of that onboarding, or add some additional component that maybe isn't there. Can I extend the apps to do things beyond what they do out of the box?
Yeah, and as mentioned before, the platform mapper is going to do that, and it has the capability to extend it as well. And what you do is you use a YAML file. So if there is also a platform that's already supported, if you take, for example, Cisco iOS, if you it gives you the option to sync in a new a Cisco iOS YAML file, and then you would extend that file, and then the Git data source would be the one that's preferred, so giving you the option to basically create your own, and so that's how you'd probably go around that.
You all have been asking lots of questions. Greatly appreciate it. Here we go. We got 11 more minutes. Let's see what we can get through. Does Nautobot or can Nautobot have the capability to do a link layer discovery of generic devices, such as IP cameras or whatever, things that are connected to a switch or a router? So Nautobot does have the capability to use CDP or LLDP information. Beyond that, as far as discovery of those devices, I'm not sure what our platform capabilities would be there. So Patty, I will pivot over to you for any further.
Yeah, that's going to be custom. I mean, if it's something that we can do, if it can be reached via IP and we can SSH onto it and it has that capability, then it's extendable within the device onboarding to create your own platform for that. So it depends on the platform, I guess, in terms of getting access to it.
Yep. This one here is kind of an open-ended question. It's about, data governance. Basically, how can I use Nautobot to make sure that I have good data beyond just the things that we mentioned today, say data validation and data integrity engines within the platform? And I think I'm not sure exactly what you're getting at here, Pedro, but it could be what I can imagine the question around is like, who can change data? Do we have a history or a record of those changes? As well as perhaps maybe who owns a piece of data, and how is that attached to perhaps some policy? So within the framework, you do have a lot of flexibility in how you can leverage it. You can also potentially use the Python aspects of Nautobot to write your own custom business logic into the way that you do that data validation and data integrity. But around the concepts of like who owns the data, absolutely, you can specify those various fields and who they belong to. You do have the capability to integrate Nautobot with your single source, single sign-on, and therefore having those RBAC controls. So you can have a lot of flexibility of as far as who owns data and who can change data, and even who can see it. You have that capability within the platform to make those specifications. So there's a fair amount of flexibility there. Patty, feel free if you have any additional comments.
No, oh, good.
Cool. Okay. So we use the single source of truth app and integration with Infodocs to import IPAM data from Infodocs Nautobot. Great. And then we follow up with, we have some issues because of a custom config on Infodocs, that is their extensible attributes, and on Nautobot, the custom fields, and trying to map those and create the mapping between those. And they've had to modify the single source of truth plugin to do this. Is there any way around that, as far as like, should we really be needing to modify the single source of truth app, or is there a better way?
Well, I mean, it depends what you want to do with them, really. There is within the app, you can actually exclude them if you wanted to do that, because sometimes the data that's there, you don't want to have. But if you wanted to do something with it, the best way to do it is to extend the app, because of the fact that you have full control then when you're talking about any of the CRUD operations, and you can implement your own logic. And if that's something that's a one-time thing, though, maybe you want to look at sort of exporting it. Like if you just do a one-time export from Infoblocks and sort of build that straight into the source of truth, that might be an easier way rather than constantly syncing it. The idea with SSOT is that you're going to constantly sync from one source to another. So sometimes we've seen with customers that they're using the extensible attributes more, or using Infoblox specifically, more as a source of truth by using these extensible attributes. But then once you start to use Nautobot, you should have the native data models to be able to support a lot of the things that you're doing within Infoblox. So what we've seen before would be that they wanted to get rid of all of the external attributes, which is why we have that exclusion filter, which you can handle from within the application. And then the best way to do that is just a one-time export, basically import them into the correct models on the Nautobot side. And then from there on in, all your syncing across from Infoblox is whatever the data that you need, i.e. the IP addresses, VLANs, and prefixes.
Got it. Do we have the capability to onboard devices from controllers? So whether that's DNAC or Palo Alto's Panorama or Arista's Cloud Vision, can we import from those controllers rather than directly from the device?
We would have to extend device onboarding to do that. The driver right now would be using NetMiko under the hood to basically do SSH onto the device. It doesn't mean that it can't be into an API, but it would need to be built. So my guess is it would be best to sort of bring in professional services to do that, because that would require some driver additions for the device onboarding. We have done it before for different platforms that had API support, but it would really depend on what controller that we're talking about.
Yep. Patty, you mentioned NetMiko, and this question was, hey, I thought SSH used Napalm with Nornir, not NetMiko.
Yeah, it used both actually. It used to use Napalm at the start, I think, and there was just sort of backwards compatibility things that we're trying to maintain there. So some of the platforms then there's a little bit more support on NetMiko for some of the platforms, whereas Napalm was a little bit more restricted in terms of the platforms that are supported.
So let's say I have a list of devices in CSV format. It's only got the IP addresses. Can we use one of or can we use some form of the device onboarding app to then fetch all the rest of the data? So basically, can I load from CSV and then take advantage of device onboarding to get the rest of the data?
Can you load from CSV into Nautobot? All you need really to get device onboarding going is a location to assign a device to a location, and then an IP address. So once you do that, that's all you need to start loading in the rest of the data, which would be anything from interfaces, VLANs, VRFs, that the device onboarding will give you, and then also the platforms, manufacturer, and stuff like that. So uh, I think the answer is yes, as in as long as you have an IP address, you're good to go.
Yeah. I think also if you think about this, right, the way that the onboarding is broken into two different jobs, you could, in theory, load those devices into Nautobot via CSV and then run the second Nautobot job to go collect configuration
Mhm.
information about those devices. Sure, that would absolutely work. Yeah.
And then, of course, with the onboarding, you would have, you can specify if you're adding all the devices into one site, you can specify the IP address as a comma separated list. So if you've had multiple IP addresses, you can do it all at once if they're all going into the same site. So it makes it a little bit easier than if you have multiple devices to be discovered.
Yep. This is someone doing some of their own custom Nautobot app creation. This is they've written their own SSOT app and to do data onboarding, and they're wondering can they leverage some of the underlying jobs that device onboarding has. And the short answer is yes, absolutely. The world is literally your oyster when it comes to Nautobot. You can absolutely interface with those other existing jobs. You would just need to install the app so those jobs get installed, and then you could leverage them from your own custom app. Sure, no problem. Yeah. Absolutely. Although, of course, we would ask, why are you creating your own SSOT app when we've got one for you? But hey, maybe that's works better for you, so no problem there. Let's see, a couple other questions here. These are kind of like development questions. So one was just like, uh, could you talk a little bit about kind of the development environment for creating applications or jobs, like say with PyCharm or some other IDE? Like, do I need more than that? Do I just install PyCharm and get going? Any comments there?
Yeah, and I think there's a developer guide on the Notabot documentation, which goes through a lot of it. We also have a lot of blogs on how to do it, and it's for the most part. I don't think it tackles PyCharm specifically. VS Code is the sort of the I guess the de facto in terms of what we use within networked code. But some of the guys also use PyCharm. But in terms of getting set up, yeah, once you pull down the repo, once you basically pull down the Git repo, and then you can open it up in your editor and you can start to work on a particular branch. Then yeah, it's from your perspective. Then if you're using Docker, then you just map that back into your Docker container, and you can spin up your own instance and test it locally.
Yeah, absolutely. A question here, but just about, like future updates, maybe to the single source of truth app in this specific case, hey, about like more flexibility in data mapping, those kinds of things. But this is true in general, my answer that I'm about to give you, which is come participate with us in the community, in the GitHub, in the repos. You can join there. You can open feature requests as well as interact with us. We're always looking for input back from the community. So if you have a specific example of a feature that you'd like to see added or something updated or changed, whether it's a single source of truth app or any other, please engage with us. We want to hear your inputs. We're happy to get you and try to implement those as we move forward in our roadmap. So short answer is come engage with us. We'd love to see how we can help and what updates, ideas you might have, others may be looking for as well. So please let us know. Okay, we've got time for a couple more questions here. Perhaps let me see if I can find a couple that might be useful. So what if I modify existing models directly in the source code? Please don't do that. That's a really bad idea. You are going to go down a train where now you've essentially branched or forked from us. That's not the appropriate way to make those sorts of changes. Patty, just real quick, I think you had mentioned earlier, I think it's going to be the same answer. Just how should I do that as opposed to say going and modifying in the source code?
You just if it's specifically on well, from an app perspective, you just create your own app, right? If you want to do something, right? But if there's something within device onboarding specifically, it has the ability to extend the application by creating your own module and mapping that to a specific platform. Okay, and again, that's well documented on the documentation site. But as Tim said, you wouldn't update the specific code. You would create your own extension and then build that extension back into your environment.
Yep. And I apologize. I know there are a few more questions that we did not have time to get to. We will try to get you, we will get you those answers to those here in a follow-up after the webinar. But we are at time, so we want to be respectful of folks' time. Just a quick recap. Hey, we went through the methods of population here today, looked at the device onboarding 4.0 app, the single source of truth app, and then covered briefly other methods that you might put data into Nautobot. Please don't forget about the 100 days of Nautobot. If you haven't joined, there is still time. We have completed the first segment and we're now into the second, but you can join at any point. You can start wherever you like. You can start in the first segment, the second segment, whatever makes sense for you. Please do participate with us. This is great. And if you are participating, let us know on LinkedIn. It's great for us to know who's actually benefiting from this project. It's a great chance to interact with Eric Chow here at NTC. Thanks again for attending. Here's links to all things Nautobot. And as always, if you're interested in a one-on-one demo, please do reach out to us. The sales team and the sales engineers would be happy to engage with you and take you through how Nautobot can change the way you operate your network. Thanks, and we'll see you on the next webinar.